He took it off because it was so bad. Kings and Prophets or something like that. Kings and Prophets. Yeah. Yeah. No. That's a different one. No, this was on ABC. It lasted for a grand total of like 1 week. And I watched the first 5 minutes of it and said, I must turn or I will get angry. Well, it starts off with Saul, and that poor guy, he was just so misunderstood. He was trying to unite all of Israel. No. He was just a victim of circumstance. Yeah. He's a victim of poor aim. So he couldn't throw to save his life. That's the guy in the zombie apocalypse you want with you while you run away.
Now, my show is a little big.
Yeah, it's got a big wheel that goes around.
Yeah, the little big shots or something, and they've been on for week after week.
Delight, do you have cable?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Hee-Haw went off a long time ago. Roy Clark, he's
gone?
No, he's still alive. No, he's dead now, I think, isn't he? Didn't he pass away? Oh, the other guy, Buck Owens. Yeah. Oh, you didn't think I'd know that, did you? Mm-hmm. Anyone care to guess where we are in the book of 1 Samuel? 31, the last chapter. We get to see the demise of Saul in its most inglorious nature. Saul has come close to dying on numerous occasions. What is up with the thing going on and flashing up there? You know you can't do that to me. It's like a squirrel running by. Up until this point, remember, now you go back a couple of chapters, okay? 28 is when Saul goes and meets the witch of Endor. And so all these events, while they're scattered over 3 or 4 chapters, they are occurring in very rapid succession. The witch of Endor tells Saul, hey, you're dead tomorrow. So this battle takes place after 28, but in between 28 you have David who's told to leave the battle because he is a Hebrew. He's got 600 men. He's the bodyguard of Achish, and Achish is like, oh man, this is cool. I got 600 Jews being my bodyguard. And the rest of the kings go, no, that's not smart, man. And in that time, David goes back, and remember what happens. The Amalekites come and take David's family, don't kill a single one of them, take all the stuff. David goes, pursues them, kills them all, but how many? 200. Close, 400. Kills all but 400. And David runs into and brings them all back. And that is now where we are with Saul. And let's see what happens. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel. And the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain at Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malachi Shaul, the sons of Saul. And the battle was pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him. They didn't find him under a rock. What it really means is they shot him full of arrows. That's what it means when an archer finds you. Saying, oh, look, there's Saul hanging under a rock. No. They turned him into a porcupine. And he was badly wounded by the archers. And Saul said to his armor-bearer, draw your come and thrust it into me, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword, fell upon it, and when the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died with his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day the Philistines came and stripped the slain and found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor. They sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put the armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. But the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard the Philistines had done to Saul, and all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there, and they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. Kind of an ignoble loss of a king, is it not? We have seen Saul lose one of his best generals through pride and envy. We've seen him chase this general through pride and envy. Now that he's out of reach, the Philistines come to war. Saul goes out and fights, and the consequences of Saul's behavior. See, this is one of the interesting things about sin. We in America, we have very much a single point understanding of sin. My sin is my sin and has no effect on my children. Does Saul's sin have an effect on Israel this day? Kind of like wiped them out. The only male child left in Saul's household, I believe, is Mephibosheth. And the only reason why he's not at the battle is because he's a cripple. He was also a baby. That's right. Sorry, you were correct, Brother Walter. He was a baby who became a cripple because they dropped him going down the stairs. That is correct. We sit and we go, oh, it's my sin. I'm punished for my sin. I'll take the consequences of my sin. Saul kind of has been playing this game because notice when it's time to offer sacrifices, go all the way back to the book because we're going to use this as kind of to capitalize the whole, or caps off the whole argument. Go all the way back, his first atrocity. Well, you weren't here, so I offered to sacrifice for you. As though that he could. Go and kill everyone. Well, I killed everyone except for the king, and we kept the good stuff alive. But we were going to sacrifice it to God. Oh. Well, God really likes that when we do things like that. When he tells us to do things, you go, yeah, there's a really good reason why I didn't do what you said. Look at the cool trinket I got you. It glows. He pursues David. He does all these things. And then when he hears not the word of God anymore, instead of searching out for a man of God, what does Saul do in 28? He looks for, the text calls her in the ESV a necromancer. And that's really the more common term because necromancers are someone that commune with the dead. Witches do more of the spells and things. They can do that. But this person's sole pass was to be a medium, kind of like the guys on TV that, you know, I've sat and watched it. So recently, you've had someone close to you die. How did you know? Well, it's a pretty safe guess. You're in your late 50s. I bet most of the people near you are dying. Then you're having financial troubles. How did you know this? Like he's reading my mind. He's just guessing, and you're going, poker face. Not kind of like that, but so he goes and he visits that person, and did he get the intel that he wanted on the enemy? Told him the exact same thing that happens here in 31, does it not? Now look at the consequences of Saul's sin. Jonathan. Is Jonathan a noble man? From 1 Samuel, can you answer this question? Is Jonathan a noble man or an ignoble man? He's a noble man. He stood up for David against his father Saul. He protected David by helping him escape Saul on a couple of occasions. He treats Saul as a dear brother, has gone to see David. Jonathan's dead. Jonathan's a noble man, but Jonathan's dead. Don't know much about Abinadab. Don't know much about Malchiah, Shaul. The text really doesn't talk much about them here. But if they were like Jonathan, they were good guys. And notice they die first. The consequences of sin are something that we sometimes don't really think about. But if you look at what happens, Saul's sin gets these 3 boys killed. Well, they're part of the royal house. They had to go out for battle. Yes. But what does the witch of Endor tell Saul before this battle begins? You and your army will be destroyed. You will die tomorrow. You and all your men. But notice what happens. Just take a look at this. Saul is hard pressed. The archers find him. He is shot, but he's wounded and he can't do anything. And notice what he does. He looks at his armor bearer and says, draw your sword and run me through, lest these uncircumcised individuals get... What is Saul worried about here in this part? Is he worried about losing, or is he worried about being mistreated? Tortured. Some would say he's being a coward. Absolutely. He is worried about what will happen to his body if he's captured. So he looks and he asks his armor bearer to say what? Draw your weapon and pierce me and kill me. What does the armor bearer do? Notice the phraseology. The armor bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Whom do you think the armor bearer feared greatly? That is a good guess. Some people would say David, because if you go over to 2 Samuel chapter 1, the guy that brings don't want to give it away because you won't show up next week. David is a possibility because he's touched the king. The way I look at it is he's afraid of God. Has the same reverential fear, because who was the armor bearer before this man? David was the armor bearer before this man. David was Saul's armor bearer, then he became one of Saul's generals, and now this young man probably has taken David's spot, and so he has seen the character of David. Now this is a great argument for silence, but I think you can support it from his actions here. Probably was with Saul at the cave. Why? That's where the armor bearer would go. Was with Saul when he camped out, and in both occasions he hears David saying, "It is not for me to take up my hands against you." Middle of a battle, the king is dead. He's dying, he's pierced, he's wounded, and you're going to mercy kill him. And yet, notice, instead of doing it and saying, "I'll take my chances with God," what does the armor bearer do? I have great fear of either David or God. Because if he's afraid of David, he's afraid of David's understanding of what? God's understanding. So either way, you've just put one more link in the chain. He's afraid of the consequences that comes from God.
Well, he felt that David felt that Saul was God's anointed.
He did. And it's right, because he is. He was selected as king. Now, David has been anointed as king. And see, this is where we get into this problem. Well, David was king. Well, he was, but he wasn't. He was heir apparent, because Jonathan would not be. But you have this issue here where you have this understanding of the man whom God selects is not someone that you easily lay your hands on. Now, we have a different form of government in our nation. In that day and age, if you made an insult against Saul, more than likely you probably just went away. Look at what David did. He didn't make a single insult against Saul, and Saul pursued him into the land of the Philistines. But the armor bearer's reaction to Saul is, I can't. I have too great of respect, either not for you, but for who placed you there. Those of you who are in the military had to explain this, I'm sure, a bunch of times to young soldiers who goes, I don't understand why I have to salute. You don't salute the individual because you like the individual. You salute the rank that the individual holds because the rank is something to be saluted. Right? You're not saluting the man, you are saluting the rank that the man has, because that's the authority that has been trusted upon him by the government. Huh? Or the woman. That's right. Or the woman. And folks and young soldiers used to get upset about that. Well, I don't like that guy. I don't think I should have to salute him. It doesn't really matter what you think. I'm glad you expressed your opinion, but this is the military. And we have given up the right of voting when we entered here. This is the way it goes. Saul is not a respectable man at all, but yet The armor bearer respects the position Saul has, not the man who holds it. And out of fear of either David, who fears God, or out of fear of God himself, the armor bearer refuses to draw his sword. And really, Saul is dead. Well, let's just be clear. Saul is dead. He's been shot up with arrows. That's really what it means by the archers have found him and they shot him. If you've ever seen an individual shot full of holes full of arrows, it looks to me like a miserable way of dying. Is he really killing Saul? He's already dead. He's already dying. He's just putting the cap on. But even under that argumentation, even under the argumentation is, don't let these uncircumcised heathens catch me. They'll defile my body. They may do so. And they'll invite judgment upon themselves. But I will not do it. And notice what Saul does. He takes out his own sword, which is not uncommon in the ancient Near Eastern world when you are surrounded, and he falls on his own sword. We were talking about this in the Sunday school class this morning. Haven't you heard the story about the young Russian soldier that was surrounded by ISIS? And instead of being captured and tortured, calls an airstrike in on his exact position and kills them all. Saul doesn't have the advantage of an airstrike. Saul doesn't have the advantage of chariots.
That's not true, because he already had an airstrike.
He could have had an airstrike. That's right. He could have been God's man. He could have been a man in which God went out before him and put the Philistines to rout. But he chose not to do so. And so now you have Saul fall on his sword. Now, I need you to remember this, because when we go to chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, because we're going to look at Saul and David. I know, Brother Abby, but we're going to be going to Samuel for Sunday school, right?
I was reading.
Oh.
2 Samuel.
You're reading 2 Samuel? But the great thing is hey, look, next quarter Sunday school material is 1 Samuel. You've got a primer on it already. If you get stuck, if one of you call in sick, we'll just load up one of my videos and run it for your class. Watch it again for the second time. I'm kidding. But in 2 Samuel, there seems to be a discrepancy about who's alive and when they're alive and when they're not alive. And this causes because when you have something like this in Old Testament studies at the academic level, things like that don't mesh completely generate conversations. So Saul falls on his sword, he's dead, and then what does the armor bearer do? Same thing. It's not a pleasant thing to be captured by the enemy in this day and age. In Joshua, they conquer a city where the king that had it had cut off the thumbs and the big toes of 10 other kings and made them fight for the scraps at his feet. And then when Joshua does it, he laments his behavior. You know, have you ever thought of life without a thumb or a big toe? You're not going to grasp anything. Think about it. That's the dude that helps you. And you're not going to run. Think about the stabilization that you get from your big toe. If you haven't, come over here, I'll stomp on it, and then watch you hobble out of here. That dude helps you stabilize. That thing helps out. It's not a polite thing to be captured by the enemy, especially as a person of rank. Would the armor bearer have certain intel that other men would not have?
Yes.
Absolutely he would. He's in that room with the king. He goes with the king everywhere. It's almost like capturing the king's cupbearer. He knows everything. Why? Because people talk in front of him as though he's not there, though he is. The young man takes his own life. Now, he could have killed Saul and taken his own life, but out of fear for the Lord, I believe, he waits for Saul to do it, then he takes his own. And notice what the text says. Thus, Saul died, his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all of his men on the same day. Let's go over and see 28. It just hit me. Let's see how close this comes to 28. Because you did not obey, verse 18 on 28, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this to you. Moreover, the Lord will give you Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Everything that the witch says happens. Your sons.
Was it the witch or Samuel?
Well, yes, sorry. It was, well,
Bring up Samuel because he complained about being disturbed in his rest.
there's a debate on whether or not it was actually Samuel or an evil spirit. The text says it's Samuel. I would lean towards it being Samuel. But yes, it's Samuel that was worked up by the witch. So the Samuel, through the power, through the ability of this witch, or somebody that looks like Samuel through the ability of this witch, tells Saul, you, your sons, and your army. Does it happen exactly that way? Every bit of it. The escapement of judgment Saul was hoping that he would find, the peace that he would find going into battle was met, and when he sees his sons die, think about it. When you see the sons dying on the battlefield, do you not think he replayed exactly what was said to him the day before? Here's the question I like to ask, and you never see it in the text. You don't see any remorse in Saul. You see escape from the consequences of the death. Come kill me quickly, lest the enemy catch me and torture me. Come in my life fast. Not come listen as I plead my case to God for my sin. Go and talk to David, and none of that. Saul dies, really, and in a very unrepentant state, watching what happens. Saul serves as a prime example, and David serves as a prime example of how to deal with sin and how not to deal with sin. David is going to commit a sin that's going to cost him 4 sons. David is not impervious to sin. That's one of the great things about Abraham, about Isaac, Jacob. You go down the list of the Old Testament heroes that are listed in the Hall of Faith, David. They had moments of great, they were like names of reverence. And then they just screw it up royally. But the difference is the brokenheartedness of the behavior. You do not see this with Saul. You do not see this with Saul at any point along the line in 1 Samuel. What was the charge that God gave the children of Israel through Samuel about the king? If he follows my commands, I will bless him. But if he doesn't, remember that? You will get a king just like the rest of the nations. And that was their request. We want a king just like the rest of the nations. And if he doesn't follow my precepts, he is going to cause you pain and struggle and will eventually cause you to be destroyed. And we see this not just with Saul, but as we continue to go progressively through the line of kings. Israel went 18 for 18 bad, or 19 for 19 bad kings, and Judah split 9 for 9.
Because there was only supposed to be one king.
It was really only supposed to be, exactly. But you see how this works itself out. Notice what happens here. Keep coming down. Let's take a look here. The next day the Philistines came and stripped the slain, and they found Saul and his 3 sons on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped his armors and sent messengers through the land of the Philistines, carrying the good news to the house of their idols, to the people. And they put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth. They also believe, many scholars believe, they also placed the head there too. So they stripped Saul of his armor. Remember what they did when they captured the Ark of the Covenant? They took it to the temple of Dagon, right? As a trophy to their god. Did that work so well for them? No. No, they wanted that thing gone. They wanted that thing so gone, they were willing to leave it with the keys in it, running, sitting on the side of the road with a sign on it that says, take. Hop, enjoy. But notice this time, they cut his head off, they take his body armor, and they put it in the temple, and it is a trophy. Now, it's pretty evident that Saul's body would be easily identifiable, even if it was pretty messed up, because Saul was probably Saul and Jonathan had the better set of armor than anybody out there.
Saul was also tall.
Saul was also a tall man. And Saul and Jonathan also were really only two more than likely that had what type of weaponry? They had iron or steel swords. Everyone else was still probably using bronze or clubs or a sharp-pointed stick.
Most of them used a sickle sword.
Yes, but it was probably bronze that they took from the Egyptians.
They used the sickle sword
Yep.
to cut harvest.
That's right. Notice what the Philistines do. They can't torture Saul, so what do? They attach his body to the wall. The text does not say how they attach it. There's theories that abound. They tied it there. They nailed it there. Super glue didn't exist, and neither did Gorilla Glue or duct tape. I mean, it's not like when you're in high school and you tape that kid to the lockers and you walk away. Won't say that I participated in that. But like I said this morning, there's a lot of things in word and deed that I did that didn't really honor God. They affixed him to the wall, he and who else? His 3 sons, as a warning, as a trophy. The news spreads throughout the land of Philistia that our greatest enemy, which truly Israel was, their greatest enemy, is dead. But also notice what else happens. The men of Israel see the battle, see the rout, and they abandon their cities. And the next day the Philistines move in. So the Philistines gain territory, kill the king, kill the heir apparent, kill any lineage of the king on the battlefield. The Philistines have got to think they're sitting pretty nice right now, because there is no king in where? Israel. Oh, except for David, who's going to ascend the throne. Let's check this out. While he dies an ignoble death, see how he is buried. But the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that the Philistines had done to Saul. Does anybody remember this city? This is the first city Saul delivers. This is the high watermark of Saul's military campaign. These are the people that when they were attacked, Saul tore 2 animals in half and sent it throughout the kingdom and said, I'll do this to any man that doesn't join me to protect this city of Israel. This is one of the only times where Saul showed any true grit and any real sense of leadership, went down, rescues the city, and the men of that city.
Is that the city they wanted to poke out their eye?
Yes. That's right. The city where the inhabitants said, yes, if you surrender, we'll poke out your eye to where you can continue to work. And that news incensed Saul, and he brought his men down and fought to free them. The men of that city. Not any other city. Not even from Saul's own clan. Saul's a Benjamite. Are the Benjamites very brave men in war? They're fierce men in battle. Matter of fact, the book of Judges records that 11 tribes turn on Benjamin, and Benjamin smacks the crud out of them. Now, they eventually get decimated because they're just simply outnumbered. But the Benjamites, though a small tribe, are some of the fiercest warriors that you have. Saul's father was a valiant man. Typically, when that phraseology is in the text, it means a great man of battle, a great man of great prowess in battle. And you see this here in this text here. All the valiant men rose and went all night. That's a 12-mile trek from that city to where Saul's at. They're hoofing it. They're hoofing it because it is not flat terrain in that area. And they are hoofing it at night. Why night?
Or the army?
To avoid the Philistines. They're doing a covert op. They are hoofing it to do 12 hours in a nighttime period in rough terrain, and then arrive with enough strength to be prepared to fight the inhabitants of the city, but then cut the bodies off the wall and hoof it back to a safe distance. They burn the bodies, more than likely because they were already beginning to rot and diseased, and they take the bones and they bury them under a tamarisk tree. While his life might have been ignoble, while his life may not have been the greatest shining example, the men of that city went and did something for Saul and took care of the body and brought it back into Israel, something that Saul does not deserve. Bury it under a tree, and then they go back to where they are. Next week, we'll see how David becomes king, because it's very interesting, because you think David would be a happy, happy, happy man, right? You hate to be the bearer of good news. By the way, the phraseology, I hate to be the bearer of good news, is an idiom that we get from 2 Samuel chapter 1. Kind of like walk a mile in their shoes. We get that from the praise of Jesus. A lot of idioms we use today are so biblical, and yet we have a culture that says, we don't want that Bible stuff. You got to walk a mile in our shoes. Yeah, way to go there, you atheists. Can't figure out stuff. Questions. What do you think? It's the end of the life of Saul. It's kind of tragic. I mean, the only other verses that were short about somebody's death was Samuel. And then Samuel died. And they buried him. One verse. Questions?
You know, we kind of met Saul when he was hiding in his tent.
You saw that. You see that when Goliath comes out, the tallest man on the battlefield, the king, has several options. I'll pay someone to do it, I'll send somebody else to do it, or I'll hide in my tent. Yeah, you see a bit of the nature of Saul early on. Was it 1 Samuel 17? Something like that? Yeah, 1 Samuel 17. And you see his behavior to threats. Except unless it's a threat that he thinks that he can control. Was David a young man in Saul's service? Yeah. Could he be bullied and intimidated? I think Saul thought he could. You start throwing spears at people, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to intimidate them or you're really going to make them mad. You see the interplay back and forth in this text between Saul and David, Saul and David, Saul and David. When David goes to die, it's going to be a slightly different scene. Any other questions? Except for where we're going next. I think I've kind of already alluded to that. Because you can't leave it this way, right? Saul dies. What happens to the crown? Where does the crown go? What happens to Israel? They're a rudderless ship. We got to go into 2 Samuel. These books are linked. By the way, we're the only ones that really put the 1st and 2nd in there. Do you know that? It's like Ezra and Nehemiah and the Jewish Tanakh. They're one book. We split them. Well, actually, they split them. And now we take up that. Any other questions that I can't answer? Okay. All right. Well, let us close out with a word of prayer, and then we'll circle up. Gracious Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for this day. We thank you for a gorgeous day. That was nice, calm weather. But Heavenly Father, we also thank you for the times when we get the rain. Unfortunately, even at times when we get the storms, we know that your hand is involved in all that, and all this comes about by your will. We thank you for Saul, a man whose life is tormented by decisions of his own making, by an evil spirit that torments him, by a thirst for rage and revenge against a young man. We thank you for the example he shows us. The example of what happens when a man pursues self and not pursues God. For the men that came and took his body, though dead, off the wall, and for their testimony to the faithfulness of what Saul had done for them. We ask now as we begin to head over into 2 Samuel that you continue to see your unfolding providence in all these activities amongst David and amongst Israel as they begin to grow. We ask your blessing on all these things. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Let's huddle up around the center here.